Welcome in to the Rock Talk studio, where I find you that next great rock and roll book or documentary to check out. My goal with this podcast is sharing with you all the good stuff when it comes to the world of rock and roll books and documentaries. And I'm going to start out the new year with the top 10 rock and roll books of 2025. And this is not an easy list to put together. It takes me a while to come up with the order for these books. It's not about the quantity, because 2025 was a huge year when it comes to rock and roll books. This is the fourth year of me doing the Rock Talk Studio podcast, and I would say this is the biggest year in regards to rock and roll books. This is a year where there was a ton of books put out, but not only a ton of books put out, the quality of the books were really, really strong. So this top 10 list is jam-packed with great books, and I had to leave some books off. I would say there's about a good 5 to 6 books that I had to leave off the top 10 list that I would recommend to anybody. So let's get it started today and jump right in with number 10. And number 10 is a really cool book. It's called Buzz Me In, Inside the Record Plant Studios. It's the story of the iconic Record Plant Studios, where you've got records like Born to Run, Rumors, Hotel California, Songs in the Key of Life, Prince's 1999, Tom Petty's Damn the Torpedoes. All of these tracked inside the walls. And that's just a very, very small handful of iconic records that were recorded along the way in these studios. Audio engineers Gary Kellinger and businessman Chris Stone came up with the idea. They were inspired by Jimi Hendrix to do this, and they rolled the dice and built a recording studio in New York City that grew all the way out to the West Coast in the 70s and 80s. There's a vibe here to this book. It's a real vibe that makes this story more than just a behind-the-scenes look at the legendary studios. I like the tone of the writing. It kind of perfectly channels the era. It kind of reminds me of Boogie Nights. It's loose, it's alive, it's full of discovery, very 70s, very informative, really cool if you want to know about what was going on, not only the studios, but the culture of that time in the recording industry. Buzz Me In, Inside the Record Plant Studios is the number 10 book. Number 9 goes to Sharing in the Groove, the untold story of the 90s jam band explosion and the scene that followed it. This is a very interesting oral history, and it explores kind of the epicenter of the 90s jam band rise, which amazingly started in Princeton, New Jersey. And it started up with Blues Traveler and Spin Doctors. And then it gets into Widespread Panic coming out of Athens, Fish in Vermont, Dave Matthews, Charlottesville, Virginia. But what sets this book apart is all the other bands that it gets into and all the different scenarios of the jam band world, like the lack of record sales, of like taping concerts, a big part of this book, the live experience. And there's a ton of really great contributions. Trey Anastasio, Dave Matthews, Derek Trucks, John Popper, Steve Lillywhite, John Medeski. All these major players are in here, but there's also contributions from other bands too. But what I really got here is the reach of the jam band world turns out to be much bigger and more interesting than I ever expected. Really cool book, Sharing in the Groove, at number 9. Here we go, number 8, with a book that really surprised me, because I have to be honest, I'm not a big Elvis fan, an Elvis Presley fan. And this book, The Colonel and the King, Tom Parker, Elvis Presley, and the partnership that rocked the world, was an amazing book. And it's the story of Andreas Cornelius Van Kujic, otherwise known as Drace, otherwise known as Tom Parker, who turned into Colonel Tom Parker. And the book is written by Peter Gorelnik, who is a Elvis expert, and he did a tremendous job of putting all this information. The first part of the book about Drace, Tom Parker, is incredible. It just blew me away. And what really takes this book over the top is that they include 300 letters that Tom Parker wrote to Elvis Presley himself and other business associates of Tom Parker. And it really gives you an inside look at who Tom Parker was and how incredible of a producer and a marketer he was back when rock and roll was just starting out. This is a deep book. It's very well written, and it's a surprise to me. I really enjoyed it a lot. If you're an Elvis fan, I would have to say this would be a must book to get. The Colonel and the King, the number 8 rock and roll book of 2025. Here's another book that was written by what I would consider an expert of the subject matter, and this book was written by David Leaf. He is the probably foremost Beach Boys historian. And the book he put together is called Smile, The Rise, Fall, and Resurrection of Brian Wilson. That's the number 7 rock and roll book of the year. Is Brian Wilson a genius? Well, there's quotes here from huge talent in rock and roll that starts out the book. Paul McCartney, Bob Dylan, George Martin, Elton John, Tom Petty, Lindsey Buckingham. Roger Daltrey of The Who said that Wilson was the equivalent of Mozart and Beethoven and Bach. Neil Young is quoted as saying that he is like Mozart or Chopin. Questlove called him the modern-day Stravinsky. And this book looks at that genius by exploring the lifelong weight that Wilson carried from attempting to create a new masterpiece with the Smile record. It's all about what happened to that Smile record, how it came together, how it fell apart, and then how it got picked up again and actually turned into a live show. I don't think anyone else could capture this enormous undertaking other than the writer David Leith. He is an award-winning writer. He's written about the Beach Boys, and he's a friend of Brian Wilson, so we really got some inside story of what was going on here during the time when they were trying to resurrect the Smile album, and eventually how they did that and how Brian actually got enough courage to go ahead and play this album live. Really cool book, Smile, The Rise, Fall, and Resurrection of Brian Wilson. This next book, number 6, won an award for the best book about a band. The awards I give out every year at the end of the year. You can check that show out too. It's in the archives if you want to know who the award winners are. I'm going to mention a few of them as we go on here. But number 6 goes to Teenage Wasteland, The Who at Winterland, 1968 and 1976. Really interesting book because it takes 500 pictures from people who actually attended the show and includes almost the whole roll of the film that they shot. So you get a lot of different angles, not a lot of your traditional glamour shots. And it marries those 500 pictures with some great writing about the band in 1968 and then how it grew to what they became in 1976. So there's a lot of progression in the band and it's really well put together. I love this book. It's kind of like a coffee table style book, but not. It's got a lot of pictures in it, but again, it has a lot of really deep text that goes into a great period in the progression of The Who, Teenage Wasteland, the number 6 book, and the winner of the Best Rock and Roll Book About a Band Award for 2025. All right, before we move on, let's take a little break and then come back and see who fell into the top 5 books of the year. Quick question before we move on. When you're looking for a new rock and roll book or documentary, where do you go? Other than, of course, hopefully every Tuesday here, you come to the Rock Talk studio for a good rec. But I created my newsletter. It's called the Rock Talk Studio Blast. It's a once-a-month newsletter that keeps you plugged into what's new, what's worth your time, and what's coming down the line. So there's no clutter, there's no spam. It's just the good stuff. It drops the last Friday of every month. And I wanted a single place where you could go to stay current on rock and roll books and documentaries other than the podcast. So it includes new releases. It includes my top 5. It's everything that you need that's actually worth your time. And it's free. And all you need to do to get a copy of it is go into the show notes. And there's a little link there to my Substack. Again, you get a free subscription and you get plugged in to the world of rock and roll books and documentaries. All right, let's get back into the top 5 best rock and roll books, which was not an easy list to come up with, I guarantee you. The top 5 books of the year. All right, here we go. The top 5 books of 2025. Number 5, Lollapalooza, the uncensored story of rock's wildest festival. This is an oral history, and it is a backstage pass to a moment when music festivals were really reinvented. It has over 200 really raw, unfiltered voices that dives deep into the chaos and the genius and the fire that Perry Farrell sparked in 1991 when Lollapalooza first started. And then it talks about how that wild and completely unique concept for a festival really rewired rock and roll culture and youth itself and created this legacy. The book covers the first 7 years of Lollapalooza, and it was a great read. And the guest list for this book is very in-depth. It takes contributions from each year that the festival played. Love this book, Lollapalooza, The Uncensored Story of Rock's Wildest Festival. Number 4, this is a piece of rock and roll history here, and that's Ozzy Osbourne's second memoir. It's called Last Rites. It was written almost a week up till Ozzy passed, and it looks at the last 6 years of his life and kind of where he's been and what he's been up to. He's been a little quiet on social media, and every now and then he would trickle out some information about his health and that he couldn't make the tour. And this book looks at what he was going through and the hell that he was going through physically and how determined he was to get back on stage. But not only that, Ozzy is at the end of his life, and he kind of knew it, and he talks a lot about his regrets, people that he needed to make amends with. Bill Ward, the drummer for Black Sabbath. Jakey Lee's another example, the guitar player from his solo years. And it's really heartfelt, and it's Ozzy. I found myself reading it in Ozzy's voice. You can't get past it, and it's really well done. And yeah, get the Kleenex out for this one, man. It's another piece to that beautiful ending that Ozzy created. It's one of a kind. It's the number 4 book of the year, Last Rites by Ozzy Osbourne. So if number 4 is that good, these next 3 have to be really, really good. And this was a tough kind of juggle that I had to come up with to determine how to do 3, 2, 1 in the world of rock and roll books this year. But I'm giving number 3 to Waiting on the Moon, the memoir from Peter Wolf, the ex-lead singer to the J. Geils Band. Full confession, I'm a huge J. Geils Band fan. I grew up back east, and I used to see them all the time as they just owned the stage back east. They were such a tremendous live band. But this documentary really isn't about the J. Geils Band. It's about Peter Wolf's encounters throughout his life with a crazy list of people you would never expect for him to spend this much time with and have these kind of adventures. And the list is crazy. It's like Alfred Hitchcock, Norman Rockwell, David Lynch. He was married to Faye Dunaway, John Lee Hooker, Bob Dylan, Jack Nicholson. Every chapter, he goes through an adventure with a certain person and tells his life story from that standpoint. Very unique, very different, very great read, really cool. Waiting on the Moon, Peter Wolf. Number 2 is another book that I would say is rock and roll history because no one else did what this guy did. No one else interviewed David Bowie, Greg Allman, Ronnie Van Zant, Jimmy Page, Glenn Frey, Dickie Betts, Joni Mitchell at the age of 15. And if you've watched Almost Famous, you know the answer to this one. That's Cameron Crowe. And this book is called The Uncool, taking a little callback there to the movie Almost Famous. And the book is almost like backstage pass to Almost Famous. You get an understanding that these stories were very real, and Cameron Crowe tweaked it a little bit, but basically he was telling his life story. His mom's in this book, and his mom's in Almost Famous. There's a lot of similarities between the two, but this goes so much deeper, especially the stories about interviewing the rock star. The story with him and David Bowie. He spent 18 months hanging out with David Bowie. Jimmy Page is sending him planes to go get him, and he's 15 again. I just couldn't get past his age and how these people were relating to him. It's really cool. It's a tremendous book, and it would be my number 1 book of the year, if not for this one book that came out. And this book came out early in the year, and it became the number 1 book on my top 5 list. My newsletter, The Blast, that I was talking about earlier, I do a running top 5, kind of like a power rankings as we go through the year. So the rankings change as new editions come out. But this book premiered at the number 1 spot and stayed there the whole year. Very deserving of the number 1 book, and I highly recommend this one. It's called Heartbreaker, the memoir of Mike Campbell that he wrote with writer Ari Sordoval. And it's just the other side of the Tom Petty story. It's a chance for Mike to tell his version of working with Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. And it's not a fluff piece about Tom in any way. Mike's very humble, Mike's very honest, and he points out how difficult at times it was to be a heartbreaker and how he persevered and how he worked through that and how his relationship grew with Tom. It's a page turner. I busted through this book in like a couple of days. I just couldn't put it down, and I really, really enjoyed it. Just like I really enjoyed all these top 10s, but the number 1 book is Heartbreaker by Mike Campbell and Ari Sordoval. Okay, that's the top 10 books. What about the top 10 documentaries for 2025? Well, that's coming up next week. I'm going to run through the top 10 must-see, must-check out rock and roll documentaries that came out in 2025. I'll catch up to you with that next week. tuning in, everybody. Love talking rock and roll with you, especially when we can get the best of the best out there. The top 10 rock and roll books for 2025. Hope you tune in next week to catch the top 10 docs. It'll leave you with a lot of great stuff to check out. All right, let's tear it down, pack it up, and head on down the road. I'll see you next time in the Rock Talk studio.